This is the first time I'm doing this, doing live. I've been posting videos about Stiff, the curious life of human cadavers, and I posted some questions for discussions. I didn't get any responses that concerns actually um, the topics presented. Uh, this chapter is very kind of interesting, very interesting, and it's chapter 8. It's about how to know if you are dead, beating out cadavers, live burials, and scientific research for the soul. As I said in the previous sessions, I introduced summaries of chapter 1 through 7 of Steve, The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers by Marinoche, an American author, of whose style I have grown to be quite intrigued, entertained, and spooked, kind of. By the way, she has also published a book called Spook, which is sincerely a bit spooky, but as informative as Steve, and also very entertaining. In my previous entries, I asked discussions of certain ethical issues presented in those chapters. You can always go to those videos and watch the material presented. Today's topic is dedicated to chapter 8 of Steve Solely, and which discusses a few uneasy topics and presents some ethical dilemmas, such as beating heart cadavers who are declared legally dead, live burials, the agonies of suspecting that one might have buried a beloved one or one's alive. Marinoche's narrative in this chapter, as in the other chapter, that's her style, uh, overlaps. The narrative overlaps a little bit intentionally between historical fact, research, and debate, and on how to define death, and going back to where she was in the OR of the University of California, San Francisco Organ Retrieval Center, led us to the ever intriguing and ingrained in our consciousness debate about the soul and whether it is an observable, measurable phenomenon, as has been claimed by some researchers. The chapter starts at UCSF Medical Center, Organ Retrieval Center, where the writer encounters H. The letter was assigned to the case by the author to observe the confidentiality protocols. H is a beating heart cadaver, a textbook case. No circumstances are given on how the patient has died. Brain death is the legal definition of death in USA and many other countries in the world. A surgeon, we are told, is flying from Utah to recover the heart. As he was operating on H, he used a cauterizer, an instrument that cuts and burns shut the vessels to minimize the bleeding. Um, to minimize the bleeding, the emphasis. This word should be, this phrase should be emphasized. The author compared the smell of the of the smell of the cauterized flesh to seared meat and wondered if she would have some. Maybe a little, she said. This is not the first time she makes such cannibal remarks or comparisons, um, and probably to prepare us for what's coming in the other chapters, in the coming chapters. When cut open, we are told H, the beating heart cadaver, looked alive from the inside. The heart pumping, the liver, the aorta, and internal organs shiny and pulsating and do not seem to be scarred by death. It is actually very bewildering. How can a person be declared dead when they are monitored for heart arrhythmias and respiratory arrest CPR is performed on them in the case an arrest happens. It is even more bewildering and taxing to the staff and to the people around not to be allowed to do so on a living patient because they have a DNR, do not resuscitate, hang over the head of their bed or at the foot of their bed. Such medical ethical dilemma can be very taxing on some people. To quote the author, and this is um, from the book, the beating heart cadaver can exact an emotional toll on the intensive care unit staff who must, in the days preceding the harvest, not only think of patients like H as living beings, but treat them and care for them that way as well. The cadaver must be monitored around the clock and life-saving interventions undertaken on its behalf. Since the brain can no longer regulate blood pressure or the levels of hormones and their release into the bloodstream, these things must be done by the ICU staff in order to keep the organs from degrading. The author of Steve then wonders the centuries of humanity, of confusion on how to define death and when the soul, the chi, ka, spirit ceases to exist. Now, before I go on, I need to stop at the previous paragraph when she talked about that the beating heart cadaver needed to be monitored for arrhythmias and CPR should be performed on them in case of an arrest. Now, here is the thing, being hooked to a ventilator might inflate the lungs, and maybe as the lung inflates, pushes some blood. But that's just oxygen, and the heart and blood circulation needs perfusion, oxygen, and nutrition, and the blood circulating. But that is a function that only the brain can monitor and monitors how the blood circulates in the body. Without that, how can that happen? I'm really like kind of confused about that. So I need to hear from you guys. Until recently, cardiac arrest, currently defined as clinical death, that's when a person um, his heart stops and no heart beating, and you can step in and perform CPR and maybe will bring them back. That was defined as death, and it is still called clinical death, but it's not the time. It's not when a person can be pronounced. Human ear, a human ear or palpation, primitive and early stethoscopes were error prone. Of course, feeble or undetected heartbeat could be construed as cardiac arrest. Brain arrest happens 6 to 10 minutes after cardiac arrest. CPR was not an early practice, so people run the risk of being buried alive. Physicians in places where they were accessible also used pain inflictions to arouse the unconscious to tell whether they were alive or dead. Unlike what is common today, in the presence of somebody who is unconscious, when one pinches the ear or shakes the person to detect the pain response. Methods in those days were ridiculously, to quote the author, painful and humiliating to both the unconscious patient or soon be declared dead and the physicians. Methods varied from blowing deafening fanfares in the ears to sticking pins in the ears, nose, and forcefully pulling tongue back and forth and pouring hot wax in the throat to slicing souls with razors. Ah, consequently, putrefaction or putrefying was considered the ultimate sign of death. So, waiting mortuaries were developed where corpses were warehoused till they decompose or show signs of life. Bells with strings attached to the soon to be announced. If the latter moves their fingers, the bell makes noises, and the attendants in the warehouse would rush to their help. Um, does this ring a bell? I've seen such things in movies such as Gender Autopsy, and I think Lazarus. Um, you can see it in many horror movies. Um, those warehouses that were started in Germany were closed in 1940s for the obvious reasons, of course. The dead did rarely, if ever, return back and to contain the stench and dangers of decomposition. I am not going to respond to any comments because I would like to finish. Then I can respond if any comments are posted. These attempts to know when exactly life leaves the body. Um, there is the April issue of American Medicine, 1907. Dr. McDougall, and I've heard this name repeated many times in many books of Mary Roach and many other articles, medical articles. Uh, Dr. McDougall thought when a person dies, the body has a sudden drop of weight that he attributed to the soul, thus materializing it to an independent substance that weighs 21 grams. He came to this conclusion after conducting an experiment that can barely be called an experiment. It included a negligible number, might be a small case study, a negligible number of dying patients that he weighed using a sensitive scale. Um, he also conducted the experiment on dogs and conducted, they had no souls. He butchered 15 dogs, as was reported in the book and many other articles, and then decided they didn't have um, a soul. Um, MacDougall had resparked the concept of the soul body debates and had to rebuttal his theory in newspapers and journals. The invention of a better stethoscope has redefined death and placed the heart in the center, and then the brain theory won over all those other theories in modern times. To make us dwell on the issue of um, more seriously, she had to display a plethora of theories that have been grounded in the human consciousness since very ancient times. Ancient Egyptians thought Ka, the essence of a person, to quote the author, resided in the heart, and that is why it was the only organ left inside their mummified bodies. The Babylonian thought the liver controls emotion and intellect and consciousness. The Mesopotamians assigned emotions to the liver, intellect to the heart, and cunning to the stomach. Descartes believed the pineal gland is the seat of the soul. Um, and there are articles that I've seen online explaining and expounding on his theory and why he said so. And the author thought maybe because it's like very vascularized or something, and it looks like it's a small, it's pineal gland. It's like um, for some reason he thought that's where the soul resided. Strabo, the Alexandrian anatomist, thought it was behind the eyebrows. The Greek Pythagoras and Aristotle viewed the heart as, as where the soul resides. It has a vital force and attributed a secondary rational soul to the brain. Plato agreed with them but prioritized the brain over the heart. Hippocrates noted the impact of damaged brain on intelligence, but thought the heart controlled heat and emotions and consequently controlled the soul. Then we would know about the concept of installment, which simply means what shows up first in an embryo must be what is most important and must therefore be the soul. Aristotle, who examined the egg embryo to find the soul, thought that's where it was. Girolamo Pontano, a Renaissance philosopher, was recorded to have examined the human embryo, but without a microscope or sophisticated dissecting tools, and erroneously concluded that the liver develops first, hence, it must be where the soul is. William Harvey, who informed us with more accuracy about the circulatory system, the arteries, and veins, of course, uh, you would understand what he would conclude from the fact that he was the first one to pay more attention to the heart, the circulatory system, and um, discovered about how the arteries took blood away from the heart and the veins bring the blood back to the heart, which was a great discovery. But still, he thought the soul circulates in the blood. No surprise there. After this scientific soul quest journey, we are brought back to the heart beating cadaver, with the surgeon busy isolating blood vessels and searing them to expose vital organs such as kidneys, liver, and heart. Notice I didn't say cauterizing them, I said searing them. The heart goes first, we learn from the author, it was taken first. It can survive only for 4 to 6 hours, while the kidneys can last up to 18 24 hours. The transplant cardiologist who is about to recover the heart has just showed up in the OR. The language used by the author to describe um, the both the man's composure and demeanor and action is kind of denunciating in character, like the way she spoke about him as she saw him. She said, "This just slays me. The man is about to cut a beating heart cadaver of a human chest." She repeated in disbelief. The words used suggest barbarism and butchery, and let's not forget cannibalism. She herself sarcastically thought she might not mind a piece of seared human flesh. As she saw the exposed, soon to be expatriated beating heart, she shared her thought with the reader that if one to look for the animating spirit of the human body, they have to look no further. Then once again, we wander with the author in spiritual quest. She, an animated energy that circulates in the body, is used in some Eastern medical systems, Eastern Asian um, medical systems, in acupuncture, treatment, and even in martial arts. The Qigong Database Center is a research facility in Japan where healers stand with their hands over petri dishes with cancerous cells and pass on those healing, uh, that animated energy to those cells and to cure them. Thomas Edison believed that smaller than microscopic live entities occupy the cells, eventually evaporates after death, hang around for a while, then moves to another person. Thomas Edison develops a scientific apparatus that was called psychophone to communicate with what is he referred to as etheric energy that has become the phone or some other telecom device we are still now using. To buffer our skepticism, the author tells us about the use of cells to validate um, lie detectors' finding in a military experiment where mucosal cells were retrieved from a person hooked to a lie detector. The cells were placed in a test tube, hooked to electrode, and hooked to a lie detector in a different room, while the test subject, was exposed to disturbing video material, and both cells and the volunteer exhibited the same excitation on graphs. The author also informs us that your cells can reveal your feelings even 50 miles away. The Army initially started the experiment to validate the theory of cellular memory, the cell as a life unit, then became means to remote viewing or spying. Like they can use, for example, cells or buccal cells received from Fidel Castro and spy on him in his speedo or something. She nevertheless concludes that the brain is therefore where the soul resides. The heart continues to beat and outlives the brain because it is endowed with the automaticity, um, which means the myocardium can generate its own electric impulses for a while before it stops. A reversible coma was declared as a definition for death by Harvard committee assigned to come up with a definition of actual death in 1968. A reversible coma, it means they know you're dead, but they cannot bring you back, and the coma might last for years or something, so they declare you as dead. The committee therefore bestowed legitimacy on organ harvest of an irreversibly comatose person. Is it okay, for example, to harvest organs of a patient with what is referred to as the locked in syndrome? Locked in syndrome is where the nerves from the eyeballs to the toes stop responding to the brain. The patients sometimes do not even display papillary reflexes. I mean, you shine their eyes to their pupil, they do not constrict, they do not dilate. So we are told that a simple EEG, electric encephalogram, would decide on whether the patient is brain dead or simply displaying symptoms of a locked in syndrome. And of course, rushing to harvest organs of somebody with a locked-in syndrome is not okay because those people can come back anytime. Um, and the encephalogram in or the EEG displays activity, brainwaves activity in a locked-in syndrome patient. Now that the author got over her fears of death and anxiety of what might the donor feel, takes us um, from the donor to the recipients and what they might feel. She moved us rather smoothly, to the psychology of organ receiver. A few anecdotal reports were laying before us that ranged from a woman who thought she became more promiscuous and demanded more frequent intercourse with her husband because she had caught the heart of a woman she thought was a hooker. A man exhibited his erection proudly to nurses, the first time he had after years of impotence because his cardiac condition and the medication, I suppose. But after he had a heart transplant, he thought that maybe he had he he had he has become regained his sexuality or virility because he got the heart of somebody who was sexually active or young. The stories vary, but most were ruled out as urban legend, even when studies were run to verify the theory of cellular memory and what memories can an organ or transplant pass on to the recipient. The writer brings us back to again to H, who a few hours ago was referred to as a patient, the beaten heart cadaver patient, the heart beating, the beating heart cadaver. The operation is winding down. We're almost at the end. The last organs to be retrieved are the kidneys, the chest, and thorax that have been retracted are now empty and filled with crushed ice, flaps of skin, fat, or whatever that has not been harvested or what's not needed. When asked if it feels different to operate on um, a dead body, a resident answered that it was closing up differently with wider space in between what he would not have done on a living. When the author rephrased the question, he said the patient was not dead, which was more confusing to me than to the author. H is a hero, the author concludes. She has just saved three patients, heart, liver, and kidneys, then got wheeled in a gurney by one staff member. In that familiar nonchalant strides, the author noticed corpses are wheeled in cold corridors to the morgue, as opposed to when the heart is still beating and the torso is full with healthy organs to be harvested. The author also um, thought that the word harvest organ has to have some uh, festive joviality to it. Um, and and there's a lot to talk about in this. Um, and I still haven't gotten any responses, I guess. So uh, if you have any comment, you can just post them and I'll respond, and then we can create a line of discussion or topic. There's a lot to discuss about, um, such as what do you think about organ harvesting? And lots of people think if a person is dead, how can their organs be helpful to anybody else? And we are also told that the heart, um, even when banked, um, still has life shelf time. So, um, such as all the other organs, but there are means now they do to keep them more functional till they place them in another person. Then one would say, well, if all what the brain needs is oxygen and blood, and why not re- revive the blood, the brain also? So lots of questions, and we all want to hang on to our lives and not to be emptied of our um, organs or bodies while we still need them, of course. And but there are those people who actually signed up for that with that intention to save other people's life because their life is no longer there. So that's a great thing to do. Um, I'm not sure whether this is the first time I'm going live, and I'm not sure whether I have to stop here or.